Well, thanks, Loretta. Senator, you hosted a very important hearing at the Senate Intelligence Committee today. You know, many of your colleagues expressed some frustration with some of the answers from Google, Twitter, Facebook. How do you feel that they did today in answering your questions?
Listen, I don't think they were prepared for a committee that's 9 months into an investigation. I felt at times like we knew more about their business than they did, and I hope they'll go back and think about the level of detail that we asked them about that clearly within their companies they haven't thought about. This is a very, very serious issue going forward. And though we may be focused on the United States elections, looking through the rearview mirror, we're also looking forward at the 2018 elections. We're looking at the economics of the marketplace and how these same tools could be used to affect growth in our economy or decline in our economy. There's no facet of society that we deal in that with the same template, either Russia or another nation state couldn't carry out an act that was devastating to the United States or any country.
Do you believe that Russian meddling influenced the outcome of the election? I know in your opening testimony, you talked a little bit about that almost 5 times as many ads were targeted at the state of Maryland than of Wisconsin. Do you think that those played a role?
Well, what I was trying to address was some of the national media narrative that was out that clearly this was something that had to be coordinated because it was surgical. It was impactful in the outcome of the elections. And in fact, when you look at the numbers and you look at the placement, what we found was a very unsophisticated approach to placement of ads, the use of non-human bots, consistent with everything else that we've seen in the Twitter world. So I can't say that there was anything different in their approach here. It just seems that the intent was to create societal chaos in the United States, more so than to impact the elections.
Right. And some of your colleagues are calling for legislation that would require companies to report who funds political ads online. Is that something that you support, or do you feel like these companies should be responsible for regulating themselves?
Well, as I said from the beginning, I believe that they fall under the same laws that every business, every media outlet does today, and that's disclosure of who paid for the ad. All 3 general counsels today admitted that they felt that the FEC law applied. So it's not a question whether we pass new legislation. The legislation is on the books, and as I made perfectly clear to them when we left, I expect them now to adopt that for every ad. And if for some reason they don't feel that they know that the money that's paying for the ad is not from a foreign source, then I expect them to do like any TV, radio, or newspaper, decline to run that advertising unless they can certify that the money is domestic money.
And you feel that will be good enough? No additional legislation should?
Well, I would only say this. At this time, I'm not an advocate of a legislative approach because the one area that we can play in, it seems to be covered. It's not going to suggest that as we go down this road and the social media platforms come back to us and say, here's an area that we just can't address by ourselves. I made a pledge to them today. If it's antitrust waivers that you need, whatever it is to collaborate to try to create a defense against this threat, let us know what it is. I'll entertain it.
Well, some of the representatives today were talking about how foreign actors are still interfering post-election 2016. They are they dealt with questioning the Electoral College, organizing events that people actually showed up at, organizing events about police shootings, racial issues, immigration. How serious is this that they are orchestrating events from over there?
Well, I think anytime you intrude in our democracy, you have committed a grave mistake. The only problem is the United States policy has not backed that up for the 1.5 years or longer that Russia has meddled in our internal election process. So on one side, you see an impact potentially in the future on elections and possibly outcomes. On the other side, you see a disinformation campaign that's really created to sow chaos, societal chaos, to take both sides of the same issue and force them to confront each other. So you wonder, as you look back at things that have happened in the United States, like Charlottesville and other, could Russia have had a hand in these? Don't know the answer, because Facebook and others haven't looked at that. They only looked at the involvement for the elections. I think it's time, especially after the hearing today, that social media platforms need to begin to look at their corporate responsibility to America and either make a decision: we can self-police this and here's how we're going to do it, which they weren't too willing to describe in detail how they do that, or we can't do it, we need help. I'm willing to help them, or I'm willing to hold them accountable for what they can do themselves.
In wake of the tragedy that happened yesterday in New York City, what role do you think social media companies play in some of the radicalization of our own citizens here, and what can we do that doesn't impede the First Amendment?
Well, show a little bit of common sense on the part of the platform themselves. I think most of us can identify something that incites the public that reads it, and they have stated that their policy is they're not going to run that. Good. Take it down. Don't wait for the Senate Intelligence Committee to hold your feet to the fire. Take the initiative to go ahead and do it. I'm not blaming the social media platforms. They've got probably a sector of the economy that has exploded exponentially at a time that no company could keep up with it. I think the red flag that's waved now is we have to keep up with it, because it's about national security. It's about societal cooperation between the American people. We can't let Russia be the winner because they divide us.
How does the special counsel moving into this new phase of the investigation impact your committee's work? And do you feel like there's been a good working relationship between the two?
Well, let me say this, that the working relationship is to deconflict any areas that are crossovers. We've had very few areas that have crossed over. I think that the decision to indict 3 individuals, when you read the indictments, they're indicative of time before involvement in campaigns. In some cases financial, in other cases lying to the FBI. Any American that lies to the FBI is going to be indicted. So I don't find that unusual in this case. And when Bob Mueller was hired in May of last year, this was a case that was handed over from January interviews. So really this has nothing to do with the actions of the special counsel. I believe the special counsel can perform their job, which is to look at all criminal aspects that might involve Russians' intent in our elections and individuals' reactions. By the same token, collusion is not a criminal charge, so I don't expect them to look at collusion, which is the primary responsibility of the committee. We're both interested in vetting for the American people Russia's meddling in our elections, because we believe that the American people deserve to know everything that Russia did.
Is there anything you learned this week that surprised you?
From a standpoint of what the special counsel did, there was nothing that I didn't anticipate would happen, not knowing the timing of it. The reality is that what we have learned in the past 7 days is who paid for the Steele dossier, and that's opened up a new front of individuals that need to be questioned. We've done a good job over the last 10 months of constructing the universe of people that were involved in some way, shape, or form in Russia's entry into the United States, and potentially their efforts to try to penetrate or meet with either campaign. What we didn't know was who to look for that we couldn't identify in that universe. Now we have a pretty good idea based upon individuals that we had not talked to that really can shed some light on the interaction of primarily the Clinton campaign as it related to opposition research. It's very unusual historically to have any opposition research done by an outside the United States entity. So this is a new venture for American politics, but I'm convinced it's one that we will continue to see, so it's better that we understand it now and we figure out the legalities of it.
Very interesting stuff. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us. And back to you, Loretta.